not what people are expecting. I don't know if they expect that I'm like have missing teeth and overalls on and like a piece of straw coming out of my mouth.
Hello friends, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Strangers in Passing. I have been busy lately, so that's why there's a delay in getting episodes out. Sorry about that. Strangers in Passing is basically a podcast that focuses on talking with people who you might not necessarily get to talk with. You might have just walked by them on the street, you might know them only from their social media profiles, or you might not even know them at all or have met them ever. On today's episode of Strangers in Passing, I talk with Christina. She's a digital communications strategist from Crowley Arkley Strategy & Co., and she's also a dairy farmer's daughter. I've got to admit that as someone who has grown up in Alberta, was born here, and is surrounded by farms, I don't really know that much about the agriculture industry. So it was really great to talk with Christina. We chat about how technology is changing today's dairy farm, how they're using social media to communicate with each other and as an educational tool, self-driving tractors. I was like, oh my God, do they have Teslas? Just kidding. We talk about farmer influencers, and we talk about how she made the first move when she first met her hockey-playing future husband in rural Manitoba. This episode kind of goes all over the place, which I really love, and it was great chatting with Christina, so take a listen. Hey Christina, how did we meet? We haven't met in person, have we?
No, have never met in person, but I'm online, which I'm sure most people meet that way nowadays.
Yeah, probably on Twitter or something.
Yeah, you know what? I think I found you on Twitter, then I stumbled upon your website and your blog, which I've been an avid reader now for
cool.
I think about a year or so. So
wow.
I've loved what you've been able to do and start up things like this with your podcast. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. So in the pre-form to this podcast, you mentioned, so you call yourself a digital communication strategist and dairy farmer's daughter. So I was like, okay, digital communication strategist, whatever, that's normal. And then I read dairy farmer's daughter and I was like, what? I'm like, I need to interview her. So can you tell me what it's like?
Yeah. So it's funny you say that because I feel like that is really the conversation piece or conversation starter that I get most times. And you'd be surprised. I mean, again, you and I have never met in person. We see each other's pictures online, but the minute that someone sees me and then I tell them I work in agriculture and food, I'm a dairy farmer's daughter, they like look at me as if I have two heads. And so I always joke with people that because, you know, if you're a good looking person who is articulate, you know, all of a sudden you work in agriculture and that's not what people are expecting. I don't know if they expect that I'm like have missing teeth and overalls on and like a piece of straw coming out of my mouth. But yeah, you know, it's an interesting interest in terms of my career too, because I just finished working in politics here in Ontario and I worked for our Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And so being a dairy farmer's daughter from Ontario, working for, you know, a member of parliament, provincial parliament, who is obviously representing them in that portfolio in communications, which is what my specialty is. It was a really unique perspective to get to every day go to Toronto where I worked and see the reaction and the look on people's faces when I told them I worked in agriculture and was a dairy farmer's daughter. And again, that the whole discussion around does a rural urban divide exist and how do we get more people understanding where the food comes from and all of agriculture. So it's a kind of a weird, interesting, neat space to work in for sure.
Yeah, and that sounds perfect for your experience. So
yes, yeah.
What is included, like, I guess when you worked on the farm, or if you did work on the farm, what is included on a day-to-day basis? Like, what kind of tasks do you do?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that because it's a great question. And, you know, there seems to be, especially with social media, there seems to be a huge conversation around food in the last few years. You know, everyone's very interested in where the food comes from, where it's sourced, how it's grown or made or harvested. And then, of course, how that relates to our diets and our health and animal welfare. And those are a big discussion. So it's great that even just you would ask that question, what we do day to day. So I'm the oldest of four kids, and actually my two brothers, they're farming with my parents now full time. So we're a fifth generation dairy farm. So we've been here ever since we landed from Ireland years ago. And my parents, they really did make it a family operation. We spent after school at night times, on weekends, always being around the cows. We were in 4-H, which is a really valuable youth program you guys have in Alberta as well. It's across Canada. And so we really developed a love for what my parents were doing, which was their passion, and it actually turned out to be their profession. And so I've always admired that they instilled that in us at such a young age, which certainly helped me in my career and shape what I'm doing now with my own business, and blending that passion and professional in one. But it's really cool because we just recently built a new barn. And so it's a few $1 million worth of investment that a lot of farmers are making. And it's a robotic barn. So if you can imagine, we have these robots that the cow, whenever she wants to be milked, she goes to the robot when she wants to. So it's very fascinating in terms of the technology and where we are as an industry, where we've come from, literally horse and plow in the early 1900s to now smartphones and robots, and you can be traveling anywhere and get the calls from your robot about what your cows are doing, and, whether Beverly, if that's a cow's name, or Bessie or Christina, whatever their names are, if they're going to the robot, and if they're milked, if they're sick. So it's pretty fascinating.
So you're not pulling nipples anymore.
We were in what they call tie stall barns, so our cows were inside, and we did at one point let them graze in pasture. But the other part of our dairy farm operations that we show our animals, so kind of like the horse industry where they ride and show horses, we show our cattle. So if you can imagine, our Canadian cows are revered around the world for genetics, for how good they are. And so my family was involved in showing our cows across Canada. Yeah, so we have tons of dairy farmer friends all across Canada that show their animals as well.
So you have famous cows.
You could say that. Yeah. We name them all. We know all of our cows' names the relationship we have with our animals, it is somewhat what people would have with their dogs or their children. Like, we really care about our animals, which I know right now the consumers maybe wouldn't think that, because we haven't did a great job of promoting that necessarily. But some of our animals, all of our animals are taken care of in such good condition because we really have a relationship with them. We value what they are to us. And so they all have names. If a cow's name is Christina, her daughter's name starts with a C. So it's a pretty cool relationship to have with an animal that you work with every day.
How many cows does your family own?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We milk around 110, but just a few short years ago, my parents milked like 50, 60, 70 cows. So we've grown quite substantially in the last number of years. And that's a really nice size farm to have for 3 families who are all working on it. And then on top of that, we have about another 150 like baby calves, heifers, kind of teenagers. And of course, because we're selling embryos and the genetics, those are why we have a lot of animals. And then we also cash crop another about 1,500 acres. So it's a very fulsome farming operation.
That's crazy. So even like selling the genetics part, I was like, what? That's that exist?
Yeah. Again, it's another cool conversation starters. A lot of people don't even know that's we're living in a country where it's so cold, and yet we want our cows outside. We could never do that from an animal welfare standpoint. But then also cool that we have animals that are so revered around the world for how good they are, that we as a country sell hundreds of $millions of genetics, embryos around the world to other countries, and countries that like you and I would never think of, like Cuba and Dominican Republic, like countries that we usually go for our drinks and beachside stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I had no idea. That's crazy.
There actually was a cow a few years ago. Her name was Missy. She was bred from Prince Edward Island. She sold in a live auction sale for $1 million. So she was kind of she wasn't our cow personally. She was a farmer friend of ours who bred her and sold her. So it is incredible the amount of money that can be made and that is transferred from farmer to farmer in the industry.
So do they actually like ship the actual cow overseas?
So that's a great question as well. Some countries don't allow live animals, so that's why you have to you do essentially like in vitro fertilization, like you do embryos. But there are still some countries that do allow you to ship live animals. It's quite costly.
Okay, that's crazy. I like don't even know what to say right now.
Yeah.
How do you have you seen an
See,
implementation?
I'm expanding your mind.
Mind blown. Have
Yeah.
you seen an implementation of like artificial intelligence in the farming community, or like what do you have like expectations on how it's going to be used or how it can help improve things?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So it is incredible. A lot of people would probably think farmers are very technology afraid or not not adapting at all. But I'd have to say, of a lot of the industries that I've seen or work in, or even just myself working in digital communications and seeing how other industries have adapted, farmers actually have been quite leading edge in how they've evolved so quickly, and how many of my friends who are 30 or even men and women who are working in agriculture and food who are 55 who are all using social media and all have smartphones and again have these robot technologies on their farms or have self-driving tractors in the prairies. Oh yeah, there's you could probably, your whole podcast could probably be dedicated a different episode to interviewing a different farmer in every sector, because technology is something we all have vastly adapted to and are using it as a great tool for our farms and our industry.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm from Alberta, so obviously there's a ton of farms and we're surrounded by farms. But I always just assumed it was still like, oh, now I have to drive my tractor. And I never thought that there would be self-driving vehicles on farms.
Yeah. Like they use the GPS and the technology to be able to, yes, if you have to spend 8 or 10, 12 hours in a tractor, if it can be at least, self-driven, it makes it a little bit more easier and enjoyable as the farmer sitting there, say in the prairies, right? Harvesting canola or wheat. So it's been cool. I've been really proud, I guess, coming from the industry, even seeing how 10 years ago when I was in university, no one had social media. We didn't have a Facebook account, all those small things that now we all have, we take for granted. And this is an industry that some people would think is very, backwards and yet we're very progressive. And so I realize, I'm wearing my communications hat now, that we do need to do a better job of doing things like, say, this podcast or promoting what we do as an industry, because there's so many smart young professionals in this industry. And that's really how we're going to help tell the story and have conversations with people like yourself to talk about food and agriculture and where does your food come from? Well, my family, we're proud to make it for you, and here's how we do that. So we got some work to do, understand that for sure.
Yeah. What are you guys doing currently, or can you talk about any projects you've done in the past to help get this message out?
Yes. So, like I mentioned, a lot of the farmers are on Twitter, which is incredible. Even I see how when they first started using it, it was like, a networking tool. Mm-hmm. And now it's, then it grew to be like a knowledge transfer tool. So people not only became friends with fellow farmers on Twitter, then they were sharing information. And now they're using even Twitter and other social media platforms as like an education tool with consumers, because they realize that that's where consumers are. And that's where they're getting their information. So even just seeing the evolution of how farmers have used social media has been incredible, because social media is certainly one area that I'm interested in with my profession. But there's a ton of organizations across Canada that are doing incredible work on this whole consumer education piece and trying to hold more webinars and online virtual tours mm-hmm. for consumers to visit, say, my farm. Even I know my one brother, Justin, when we had a big open house day for our new barn last year. And he did actually, leading up to it, did a bunch of videos just to show fellow farmers and people interested what it looked like throughout the building process, and then did a final video last August when we had our open house for both farmers and consumers to come visit, and he had over like 100,000 views, all organic. So wow, it's pretty powerful. Yeah.
So are there farmer influencers?
Yeah, so it's another great question, Beverly. So if you can imagine, there are people within our sector across Canada, young and old, male and female, who are showing their farms through social media and are influencers in our sector. The next biggest part will be getting those people to be influencers with consumers, which we're starting to see that type of penetration. I mean, I can certainly send you some links too to some of those farmers. They're
Yeah.
dairy farmers, sheep farmers, cash crop farmers, doing an incredible job telling their story about how they farm, why they farm, and why they're proud to get the food from their farm gate to the plate of the consumer.
I have to ask this question, and if you want, you don't have to answer it. What about like the animal rights people online?
Yes.
I feel like there's lots of trolls.
Yep.
How do
So
they get? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so our industry, that's another great question. Our industry has a lot of discussions with animal activists, or a lot of our industry perception can be influenced because of those trolls, as you call them. Mm-hmm. I mean, because I do have some friends who are vegetarians and vegans, and that doesn't stop our friendship. You know, I've often said, I'm not going to fight with a vegan or a vegetarian and run them down, because then that makes me only as bad as them if they run my industry down. So I typically like to take the high road with those type of people. And if anything, a lot of it does come down to education, but I understand everyone has their own lifestyle choices, and that's not something I'm going to fight with. But it does, to that borderline though, if you are starting to run with misinformation and then try to, hurt an industry like agriculture and food because of it, that is when I do have an issue with you, as you call them, the trolls. And Netflix, I think of Netflix. My husband Andrew and I watch Netflix often, and documentaries like Food Inc. really did start the conversation a few years ago, right? About animal activists and animal welfare. And it does hurt. There are days where it is tougher than others to see those trolls saying what they are saying. That just tells me, as a communications professional, we need to do a better job of getting out ahead of the story to set the tone, right? So we've been reactive in that way as an industry.
You mentioned you have a new business.
Yeah. So I was working in agriculture and food. It's been 10 years since I graduated. I was working in a really amazing job. And then the opportunity to work for our Minister of Agriculture in the province of Ontario came up. And I'd always been interested in politics. It's another kind of, you and I feel like we could have a whole other conversation on politics. So I left my very comfortable job that I loved to try politics. And I knew going in that it was a majority government. So I had 4 years to really go in and serve my industry well, serve the man I was working for, Minister Jeff Leal. And then I worked on the election, which was last June. And funny enough, a lot of people don't know this, but when you're a political staffer, if the government that you're working for, if they lose, you also lose your job. So it's not it's not a public sector job. It's a political job. So last June, the people of Ontario voted, and the governing Liberals at the time had been in power for 15 years. So they got voted out, and so I lost my job with my minister at the time. Okay. And it was a really cool experience, I guess, to go through, even in a bittersweet way, because it made me decide, I could go back in and work for agriculture and food within one company, but I really wanted to work for a number of people and really help get this communications issue figured out. And so that's why I started my own company, Crowley Arkley Strategy and Co., which is my last name. Right. Super easy. And I'm just helping. I have a lot of my clients are agri-food clients. Some of them are not. And just helping businesses, get their message out through social media and through the right digital communications tools to target the right audiences.
So do you advertise? Like, is that your specific niche? Like, you only work with that industry, or do you work with like any industry?
So I work with any industry. I've always said I never say no to anything. I'm open to anything. So, a lot of my clients are agri-food clients, but I do have a lot of CEOs and executives of different industries who want to further their communication skills, especially on social media, and work with some clients like lobbyists. I work with some wine and spirits companies, again, some food companies in particular, and then of course agriculture. So I like the variety, and I like learning, as I'm sure you do, like learning from other clients to see who's really far ahead, who needs to catch up, and how you get them there. Yeah,
definitely. Also, in your pre-email, you said how a dairy farmer's daughter in Ontario married a hockey boy from rural Manitoba. Can you please tell me this story? It sounds so cute.
So I often tell people whenever they ask how Andrew and I met, I got the best 2-for-1 deal possible because I got my university education at the University of Guelph here in Guelph, Ontario, which we still live in the city. And then I got my degree, my university degree. So I really got the best. I spent the best money, best ROI. But yeah, he actually came to play hockey for the University of Guelph hockey team. And the day before second semester started, winter semester, he helped me with my bags into our residence. We were in the same res and had never met. So I was the one who went back down and actually asked him out for coffee to say thanks. Yeah, it was the best decision I ever made. So
because I think lots of women are scared to make that first move.
Totally.
Yeah, so that's totally good. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah. And it's funny, I should mention, actually, I should put a plug in this, that's another thing that we are, I think of like how I was raised by such a strong female, my mom and my dad, and how they really empowered me and my sister. And through a program like 4-H, like we really were taught at a young age to like be confident in our decisions and our problem solving abilities and public speaking. And so, I mean, something like that definitely prepared me for having the courage to go back down and ask, my now husband out for coffee. But even now, I think of the amount of leadership development that our industry still, we're trying to get there as an industry. We have a lot of work to do, as I know many other industries do, but we are really starting to band together, a lot of us women in agriculture, and really helping each other on the personal professional development side. So it's serving me well as a professional and serving our industry well too.
What exactly is 4-H?
Yeah, so 4-H is a leadership development program aimed at youth, and I know in the past maybe it was geared towards rural youth, but I know they're trying to get into more urban centers. And so what they do is have different clubs, they call them 4-H clubs, focused on different topics. So, when I was growing up, there was a dairy club, there was a knitting club, there was a scrapbooking club. There was all these different types of clubs that, yes, you're learning about a specific subject, but what it was trying to teach you was more about personal development and being a better human being and fostering, say, better public speaking skills and confidence. So it's been around in Canada for 100 years. It was actually started in Manitoba. Very random fact. Roland, Manitoba. But it's a program that I speak very highly of because it certainly impacted my life for the better. So
cool. Just to finish it off, what is one tip or recommendation you'd give a stranger on like what to remember when they're living their life, I guess?
Oh God, that's a very fulsome question.
Use your own experience.
Oh boy. I feel like sometimes, I probably would say like live life to your fullest, which I realize is way too generic. And I mean, back to what I was saying about how I never say no to anything. So literally my agenda, my to-do list is always packed because I never want to turn anything down because you really never know, again, who you're going to meet on the steps of Johnston Hall at the University of Guelph 10 years ago or 15 years ago. What I've really learned recently, especially with, getting into politics I'd never worked in politics before, and then now starting my own company and even working in agriculture and having to have tough conversations with those, animal activists, as you say. I love the quote, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And that probably is, the saying that I live the closest by, because when you're comfortable, you're not learning, you're not living. It is really when you're put in uncomfortable situations that turn, they can be bad, uncomfortable situations, but eventually they turn good because you learn something from them. So yeah, I'd probably say life begins at the end of your comfort zone.
If you want to connect with Christina, you can find her social media links in the show notes. And if you want to connect with me, just find me at Hello Beverly. My information is also in the show notes. I do have a bunch of interviews I'd like to get out, so please bear with me. I'll try and have another episode up in another 2 weeks. But for now, I guess if you want to milk a cow, remember that you don't have to start pulling on its nipples. But if you do want to pull on its nipples, that's really weird, and I would run probably very far, far away from you. Bye!